November 23rd, 2006. It was Thanksgiving morning in Bluefield, West Virginia. Most families were still inside their homes. Kitchens were starting to warm up. People were getting ready for the holiday. But that morning, Leslie Lubakowski and Tom Karos were preparing for something completely different. They were loading caving gear into the back of a truck. With them was 17-year-old Kayla Lynn Malabone. Kayla Lynn had never been inside a cave before. This was supposed to be her first real underground trip. Nothing extreme, nothing dangerous, just a short, beginner-friendly cave, the kind experienced cavers often use to introduce someone new to the underground world. The cave they had chosen was Clay Cave. Clay Cave was not known as a difficult system. It was small, familiar, and close to the surface. It did not require advanced rope work or long hours underground. For people who knew the area, this was the type of cave that felt safe enough for a first-timer. Leslie had been there before. She knew the route. She knew where the cave tightened, where it opened again, and what to expect from the passage. There was no reason to think this short Thanksgiving morning trip would turn into anything serious. The three of them reached the cave before midday. At the entrance, they got ready in the usual way. Headlamps checked, gloves on, basic gear prepared for a short trip underground. Then one by one, they entered the cave, leaving the cold November daylight behind them. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Clay Cave began with a low passage leading inward. Kayla Lynn moved carefully through it, the way most beginners do. Every hand placement mattered. Every step had to be thought through. Underground movement feels very different when you are doing it for the first time. You are not walking normally anymore. You are crawling, bracing, twisting, and learning how your body fits through rock. Her headlamp lit only a small area in front of her. Leslie and Tom stayed close. At this point, the trip was still exactly what it was supposed to be. A simple beginner cave trip on Thanksgiving morning. But about 50 feet inside the entrance, the passage changed. The route now required a movement known among cavers as canyoning. This means moving downward and sideways through a narrow slot, using the cave walls for support. Experienced cavers do this kind of movement almost automatically. They know how to press against the walls, where to put their feet, and how to control their weight. But for someone who has never done it before, it can feel completely unfamiliar. The walls are close. The angle is awkward. The footing does not feel natural. One wrong placement can change everything. And that is exactly what happened. Kayla Lynn slipped. It was not a huge fall. There was no dramatic drop, no loud crash, and no long moment where anyone had time to react. She simply lost her footing and dropped into a lower section of the passage. When she stopped moving, she was stuck. The cave had trapped her in a very specific position. On one side, a sloping wall pressed against her body. On the other side, a small spur of rock stuck out from the wall and blocked the space she needed to move. It was not a large rock formation. Under normal circumstances, most people would never have noticed it. But in that exact spot, with Kayla Lynn's body pressed into the slot, that small piece of rock was enough to lock her in place. She was not badly hurt. She could breathe, she could talk, but she could not move in any useful direction. Leslie and Tom tried to help her. In the tight space under headlamp light, they looked for any angle that might free her. They tried to see if she could be pulled upward, shifted sideways, or rotated out of the slot. But nothing worked. The cave had her held too tightly. Eventually, Tom made his way back out to the surface and called 911. It was late morning on Thanksgiving Day. Above ground, the holiday was still going on as normal. But 50 feet inside Clay Cave, a 17-year-old girl was pinned underground and could not get out. Bluefield, Virginia Fire and Rescue responded to the call. Cave rescues were not something they dealt with every day. This was not a routine situation. But when the crew arrived at Clay Cave, they moved quickly and focused on the problem in front of them. They reached Kayla Lynn inside the passage and saw almost immediately what was keeping her trapped. The main problem was the rock spur on the left side of the wall. It was small, but it was in exactly the wrong place. Kayla Lynn's body needed that space in order to move, and the rock was not going to move on its own. So rescuers decided they had to remove part of it. They brought in a hammer and chisel and began working on the rock by hand. This was slow, careful work. Kayla Lynn was right there beside the area they were striking. The passage was cramped. There was very little room to swing tools, move around, or reposition equipment. Every hit had to be controlled. Piece by piece, they chipped away at the rock spur. Because the space was so tight, rescuers had to rotate in and out. One person would work until the position became too uncomfortable or exhausting. Then someone else would take over. At the same time, they noticed another issue. Kayleelin's clothing was making the situation worse. Her outer layers added extra thickness to her body. It may not sound like much, but in a cave rescue, even a small amount of fabric can matter. When someone is stuck in a tight slot, centimeters can decide whether they stay trapped or come free. So rescuers cut away the excess clothing they could safely remove. They were trying to make her profile as small as possible. Leslie and Tom were also not pushed aside from the rescue. Since they knew the cave and had been with Kayleelin from the beginning, they were useful inside the passage. Their experience helped, especially in a place where movement was limited, and the cave itself was part of the problem. After enough of the rock spur had been chipped away, rescuers were ready to try pulling Kayleelin out. Kayleelin was still caught in the slot, and the cave still had just enough grip on her to keep her there. Then the angle changed. The space opened just enough. Kayleelin came upward, out of the narrow slot, and back into the wider passage above. She was free. After spending several hours pinned underground, Kayleelin was able to stand. She was not seriously injured. She walked out of Clay Cave under her own power and returned to the surface. Outside, it was still Thanksgiving Day. That evening, WVVA TV Channel 6 reported the story across the region. For local news, it had all the elements of a dramatic rescue. A teenage girl trapped in a cave, emergency crews called out on a holiday, and a rescue completed before dark. To most viewers, it sounded like a terrifying close call. While families had been eating Thanksgiving dinner, a teenager had been stuck underground in a West Virginia cave. But a few days later, the story became a little more complicated. On November 26th, Leslie Lubakrevsky filed her incident report. Her account was calm and direct. She explained that a more experienced cavers likely would have moved through that same section without getting trapped. And even if they did get stuck, they may have known how to adjust their body and work themselves free. She also believed the emergency response may not have been necessary in the way it happened. In her view, there was another version of the rescue that could have played out very differently. Someone could have called another experienced caver. That person could have come to the cave with a hammer and chisel, understood the problem, removed the small rock spur, and freed Kayleelin without turning the incident into a full emergency response. But that was not the version that happened. Kayleelin Malabone had been trapped underground for several hours, unable to move, while rescuers worked stone away from around her body. Objectively, she was never deep inside the cave. She was only about 50 feet from the entrance. She was not badly injured. She could breathe and speak the entire time. And the cave itself was supposed to be beginner-friendly. But that is what makes the incident so unsettling. Clay Cave had been chosen because it was easy. The passage that trapped her was not considered dangerous. And yet, on Thanksgiving morning, just 50 feet from daylight, it was enough to hold her in place for hours. The second incident happened in Mexico, less than a month after the first one. And this time, the victim was not a beginner. He was the instructor. On Saturday, December 9th, 2006, a group of 28 people arrived at Hoya de las Guaguas, in the state of San Luis Potosí. This was not a casual cave trip. The group belonged to the Asociación de Montañismo y Exploración of UNAM, one of Mexico's respected university exploration clubs. They had come here for the final day of a technical caving course. For the students, this was supposed to be the moment where everything they had learned finally came together. The rope systems, the safety checks, the descent technique, the confidence to move in a real vertical cave instead of a practice setting. And Hoya de las Guaguas was the perfect place to test that. The entrance is a massive vertical shaft, dropping roughly 150 meters into the limestone. That is about 490 feet. From the rim, the cave opens straight down. The sky is above you. The rope hangs into darkness below you. And once you go over the edge, there is no easy way to undo that decision. But this group had trained for exactly that kind of environment. The ropes were rigged, the group prepared at the top, and one by one, people started descending into the shaft. The process went normally at first. One person clipped in, went over the edge, and disappeared below. Then the next, then the next. With a group of 28 people, this would have taken time, but nothing about the morning appeared to be going wrong. 27 people made it down. The only person left at the top was Alejandro Vera Morales. He was 41 years old. Alejandro was not one of the students. He was an experienced caver and an instructor with the UNAM Association. He had the background and the trust to be helping lead this course, and that is why he was the last one down. In many organized descents, the most experienced person stays at the top until everyone else has gone in. That person can watch the group, help with problems, make sure nobody is left behind, and only then descend themselves. So when Alejandro clipped in last, that likely felt normal. He had watched everyone else go down safely. The students were below. The descent was almost complete. All he had to do was follow them. Alejandro connected himself to the rope and began his rappel. Then something went wrong almost immediately. Somewhere near the top of the shaft, Alejandro became separated from the rope. The available accounts do not describe the exact second it happened. There is no long sequence of events recorded, no detailed warning sign, no struggle that gave people time to react. He simply detached from the system and fell. From near the top of a 150-meter shaft, there was no chance of survival. Alejandro Vera Morales died instantly. Below him, the rest of the group was still inside the cave. Some may not have understood what had happened right away. In a deep shaft, sound does not always behave clearly. A noise from above can echo, distort, or disappear into the space. But at some point, the group would have realized the same thing. The final person had not arrived. Their instructor was supposed to be coming down behind them, and he was not there. Now the situation had changed completely. This was no longer a training descent. It was an emergency inside a 150-meter pit, with 27 people still underground and one man dead at the bottom. Espeleo Rescate Mexico was called, along with the Cave Rescue Division of the Red Cross in San Luis Potosí. By the time rescuers became involved, there was no rescue possible for Alejandro. The fall had been fatal. The operation was now about recovery and about getting everyone else safely out of the cave. That was still a serious task. The rescuers had to work through one deep vertical entrance. They had to rig their own systems, send personnel down, recover Alejandro's body, and then bring the remaining members of the group back to the surface. On Sunday, the following day, at around 1:10 p.m., the rescue teams had their rope systems ready and began the operation. A little over 3 hours later, at 4:20 p.m., Alejandro's body reached the surface. The remaining people were brought out after that. For a cave recovery, the response was organized and efficient. The cave was deep, but the route itself was not complicated. The challenge was the vertical distance, the weight, the rope work, and the need to keep the rest of the group safe while recovering the body of their instructor. But the most important detail came afterward. When Alejandro's equipment was examined, investigators found that his carabiner had not been locked. That was the detail that explained the fall. His rope system had depended on that connection holding. But if a carabiner gate is not locked, it can open under the wrong pressure, angle, or movement. And once that happens, the rappel device or rope can come free. That appears to be what happened here. Alejandro had gone over the edge of a 150-meter shaft with a carabiner that was not locked. No one could say with complete certainty how it happened. Maybe he clipped in and simply forgot to lock it. Maybe he thought he had locked it, but the sleeve was not fully secured. Maybe it was locked at first and somehow came open during the first moments of the descent. But the final result was the same. One small piece of the system was not secure, and at that height, there was no second chance. That is what makes this case so painful. Alejandro was not untrained. He was not careless in the way people sometimes imagine when they hear about fatal accidents. He was experienced enough to teach others. He knew the equipment. He understood the danger. He had likely performed the same checks countless times before, but experience can create its own risk. When someone is responsible for a group, their attention is often everywhere except on themselves. They are watching students. They are checking the rope. They are answering questions. They are making sure the descent keeps moving. And because they are the instructor, everyone assumes they are fine. That may have been the problem here. By the time Alejandro prepared to descend, everyone else was already below him. There may have been no one left at the top whose job was to stop him, look at his setup, and check the system before he crossed the edge. The instructor had checked the group, but who checked the instructor? That is the question this incident leaves behind. Because the mistake was not dramatic. The rope did not snap, the anchor did not fail, the cave did not flood. No hidden rockfall suddenly changed the situation. It came down to a carabiner gate, a tiny part of the system, a check that takes only seconds. And yet, on December 9th, 2006, That mischeck was enough to kill a man who had spent the day helping others descend safely. Alejandro Vera Morales was 41 years old. He was the last person at the top. He had watched 27 people go down before him. The course was almost finished. And then, on the final descent of the day, the instructor fell. Hoya de las Guaguas is still there in San Luis Potosi. Caver still visited. Ropes still hang into the same dark shaft. People still clip in at the rim and trust their systems before leaning back over the edge. But this incident is remembered because it proves something brutal. In vertical caving, experience matters. Training matters. Good planning matters. But at the edge of a 150-meter drop, none of that replaces the final check. And for Alejandro Vera Morales, the final check failed.